During my lifetime, there's been many cases on individual things when there's a debate about Scotland and England together constitutionally. That Scotland's a basket case. During the 1990s, when Scotland was trying to set up its own parliament, these statements appeared again. But it wasn't until 2012 up to 2014 with the Scottish independence referendum that things went overboard. All the different phrases that implied that we Scots are simply too wee, too poor and too stupid to run ourselves. The UK Unionists, with the support of every media outlet, kept telling Scotland the phrase that we're too wee, too poor and too stupid to be a sovereign, separate country. They said it in lots of different ways, but this was the message they said. To that message I say a double positive, which in Scotland I right means a negative. I right means no, get stuffed, you must be joking. Lots of different ways to use I right. I'm going to use it once or twice during this presentation. During the years, 2 or 3 years before the independence referendum, the Unionists within Scotland and the UK at large formed an organisation called Better Together, saying that Scotland's stronger than the United Kingdom. These 4 people here were key to the campaign in Scotland. This is one of their posters that they put round, one of many. I just want to highlight 2 or 3 things on it. In the left-hand column here, under campaign arguments, it says economic interdependence for more than 300 years. That's not the true history. That's the myth. That's the official narrative. The true history is that in 1708, Scotland became a colony of England. They ignored the Treaty of 1707. They then spent, up until the 1970s, removing millions of Scots from this country, forcibly took land, paid our wages less, made it hard in Scotland. The interdependence was one way. They took the money from us. During the campaign, even respected oil businessmen came up to support the Union and said that Scotland had only 10 or 15 years of oil left. Now, today in 2025, we've still magically, just like the fairy tale, we've now got 50 years supply of oil and gas. Economic uncertainty. Yes, there is a little economic uncertainty when you change to an independent state. But if you know your history, you'll know that in Europe, lots of states have become independent since the Second World War, and also around the world. And not one of them, not one, would go back to what they had before. They said then that historical ties in the UK could not easily be broken. Brexit showed that that's a lie. Not only did we sever ties quite quickly under complex every single law with the European Union, they also changed it in Northern Ireland magically so that Northern Ireland can trade in the UK and the EU. It's all lies. It's smoke and mirrors. They even tried to love bomb us. Politicians in the last week or two brought in celebrities to say that, well, we'll really miss you. Please don't leave us, Scotland, after spending 3 years telling us we were rubbish. There was no campaign to support the benefits of the Union. The words that they used in all the different TV shows, radio shows and so on were only set to belittle all Scots by implying that we, Scotland and the Scottish people, are totally unique in this world, really are unique in that we have no ability to manage ourselves. That's what they were saying, without the warm embrace of the UK Union that's been stripping wealth for us since 1708. Now to move on to the first one, too wee. The phrase too wee refers to the assertion that Scotland as a country would be too small geographically to possibly become a viable sovereign country. Even while on holiday during that period, I met two people, both Americans, not together, that said that they agreed with this. I mean, are people stupid? Do they have no comprehension of the world that they live in? So, some facts. In square kilometres, this is the land area of the different parts of the UK. So England's Parliament controls 53% of the UK land. So here's the figure for Scotland on the top of this screen again. There's 195 countries in the world. 79 of those countries in the world are smaller than land area in Scotland. That's 40.5% of the world's countries. 100 countries, in fact, are smaller in land area than England. 117 countries in the world are smaller in land area than the UK. So let's twist the thing round. In other words, 78 countries in the world are larger than the UK. How can they cope? I mean, if Scotland's a basket case without the all-embracing UK, how possibly can the UK survive a minute without, because it's just too small. It's smaller than all these other countries. It's obviously too wee. These are the countries in Europe that have a population in land area smaller than Scotland. They have economies larger than Scotland, many of them, but in land area they are smaller. Obviously, none of those countries can survive on their own without a lord and master somewhere. What a load of rubbish. I write. Now let's look at too poor. This phrase too poor refers to the assertion that Scotland as a country would be incapable financially to survive and become a viable sovereign country. There's two ways to look at this. The one that all the Better Together campaign did, they used it economically within the UK, and they didn't even get that right. And you can also look at what may happen to Scotland in the wider world if it was independent. But taking within the UK first. But before I go into this, during my time in my working life, I spent quite a lot of time in England. And a few, very few, people in England had a go at me and Scotland, saying that we're a basket case and we have to be bailed out all the time by England. Some said the UK and some said the GB. And this myth comes from the Barnett formula. This has been used in the UK in decades. There's 10 Barnett formula regions in the UK, 7 in England, and then there's Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Using census data, these areas get money and funding based on what the census data tells the UK government. In the case of Scotland, where this myth comes from that we're a basket case, is Scotland does marginally get more money per head of population than the other parts of the UK. The reason for this is degradation and rundown for the last 100 odd years. We also have lots more roads relative to our population and so on. But what this doesn't tell, it doesn't tell you how much money flows the other way. The criticism is only about the money flowing into Scotland from the central government. It doesn't say how much money goes the other way. In fact, Scotland, since figures like this began in the late 1880s, actually show that Scotland, financially covering everything, is a net contributor in wealth to England, and it has been every year since, and it is today. So, moving on to the specific thing about within the UK, the Scottish Secretary Ian Lang created a system called GERS, which stands for General Expenditure Revenue Scotland, and he published it first in 1993 and every year from 95 since. And its sole purpose was to credit the campaign then for Scotland to get its own parliament. The Conservative government and the Conservative supporters did not want this. But during the independence referendum and since, this has been used as a hammer to attack the notion of Scottish financial viability. I emphasise that GERS is the expenditure within the UK and not a separate sovereign state, which often is the implication on the media like the BBC and any other channel. They talk about we're a basket case, but they don't say within the UK, and they don't say how restricted the figures are. It's simply a political construct to discredit Scotland. I'm not going to say too much about it other than summarise it in this video, but if you want to know more, I created a video in 2000 called Scotland's Economy in the UK, and it goes into quite a bit of detail, and it also looks at the other natural resources and benefits that Scotland has on its territory. If you're interested, have a look. This chart here is taken from my 2020 presentation. Although it's in the past, the figures are different, but the whole story is the same and the reporting categories are the same. So what you can see on the left here is the different categories that the spend is reported in. The block grant, which you see here, is the amount of money given in billions to Scotland by the UK government from the HMRC. The UK spend is those areas where the UK spend money in or for Scotland, sometimes without Scotland, because Scotland doesn't have control over everything. And that's the split. So in that particular year, 58% of the spend was under Scottish Government control, as seen here, which doesn't include all costs. The other thing you have to realise is that the block grant by law cannot be overspent, so it's usually underspent every year by a couple $100 million. Therefore, it's only the UK government that can overspend or over-allocate to Scotland. Scotland cannot, and the money that comes to Scotland is controlled by the UK government. The UK government controls everything. If you look at the bottom centre here, you'll see that there's a difference of 18% between the tax revenue and the expenditure. This is what's used to hit us. But this is only part of the equation. All the resources of revenue, which is in the total at the bottom here, are taxes. Lots of those taxes, value added tax, national insurance, corporation tax, fuel duties, everything is under the control of the UK government, and they're estimates for Scotland. So the figure difference of 13 billion in this example, is that true? What are the estimates? What is actually going on? Here are the figures for last year from the latest GERS reports. If you look at the spending versus revenue, it shows you that Scotland did indeed make a loss of 26 billion. If you actually look at that as a percentage of the total, it's a different figure from 1718, but the percentage of loss is about the same. The figures are manipulated, perhaps just the same. But GERS isn't used now. A few years ago it was all over the newspapers every July when they came out, and it was on the BBC television, Sky News, everything, having a go. But now hardly ever anybody reports it, and that's because the figures are totally discredited. And if you look for any given year at the expenditure figures for Scotland from the Office of National Statistics, you'll see that there's billions of difference between the GERS figures and the figures that are estimates from the National Statistics Office in London. This distorted analysis, GERS, according to the supporters of the Union, with and without Scotland, show that we are an economic basket case. But it does not include all of our exports of electricity to England, our food and whisky sales overseas and to England. Does it include all of the oil wealth and independence Scotland could sell? Even the UK's own trade data shows that Scotland generates more wealth than any other region of England, including London. GERS is totally nonsensical premise for measuring Scotland's independent economic performance. Yet our media just blab it out in subjugation to London rules OK, with no meaningful analysis ever reported. So what about as an independent country? I mention here the cost of colonisation. Scotland is a colony. It doesn't even have ports with ferries and ships going to other parts of Europe and to our shipments and trade. Everything goes through England and everything flows to England. Okay, that's all the wealth, all the money, everything, and it's been that way because we're a colony. You may think, how can that be a colony? But look into it. Look at my earlier videos. Find out what's going on, because it's true. So here is examples of the GDP, that's wealth created per person, in countries that are about the same size as Scotland. GDP simply says, take the working population, divide it into the turnout of the country, and you get so much money per person, per capita. It's a measure, one of many. This is the UK measure of the same, with 68 million UK. So Scotland's a way down there. Sorry, England is a way down there. UK is a way down there. And here's the Scottish figure, produced by a company called Statistica, which uses UK government altered and estimated data. So this is their estimate of us within the UK, and the Scottish figure is in the UK figure. But an independent Scotland should be recording a GDP per capita approaching twice the distorted colonial level of 44,000. An independent Scotland should have around £75,000, twice the current level. Scotland's lucky and it has huge resources of energy, not just oil and gas, but wind, underwater turbines, and if we ever need it at some future date, lots of coal. Using the differences between the actual 2023 GDP per capita figure and the estimate for an independent Scotland, the cost of the Union is equivalent to a loss to Scotland today of between 150 and 200 billion, depending on how you work it out. That's the difference. That's the money that's been siphoned off to feed England. Scotland's turnover, according to the accounts down in London, is our turnover currently is 187 billion. It should be higher. If we were independent and not funding the world and nuclear submarines and so on, we could have a lot more money in Scotland as an independent country. Another example, this is the cost in cents, in dollars, to create electricity. The Scottish UK figure is 44 pence in dollars, kilowatt hours, and there are some other oil producing countries, and you can see the comparison, and the difference is we're being taxed much more than those other countries. Kenny McCaskill, an SNP member who knows now in the Alba party, knows a great deal about energy and how it's created, and the equivalent cost for Scotland, an independent Scotland, would be 8 pence plus any profits the country wanted to take. But fuel poverty exists in Scotland, a country that should be able to provide lower energy costs, high energy prices and so on, which means we're less competitive in the world. Scotland currently, 2025, produces 3 times its own electricity needs, and all of it in above the one, our own use, goes to England, but we get no money for it. By 2030 it's estimated that such a situation would generate an independent Scotland around £100 billion a year from the UK. Yet all this news and all these figures I'm mentioning have totally passed by our colonial administrators in Holyrood. And all these other organisations you see here, they never mention it. They don't look at the true costs. They only look at the published colonial data coming out from down the road in London. Imagine a future in a future independent country. Had Scotland been independent, imagine with all our past skills over the century or so on, building things up, we could do all these things ourselves. But even today, thanks to the UK's protective cover, windmills, turbines are built abroad, assembled here in England and moved to Scotland. We can't buy it ourselves thanks to the free ports contract in 2025. These are some statistics about Scotland. I could in fact fill about 8 screens of these to give you an idea of Scotland's inherent wealth and what we produce. As I said, Scotland produces 3 times its own electricity needs. We are totally 100% sufficient in food production. Scotland has 60% of the fishing landing rights, 46% of the forest area and 62% of timber production for the UK as a whole. We have 30% of the beef herd, 70% of the gin production and 20% of the potato crop and 99 point something of whisky. Scotland has 8.2% of the population of the United Kingdom, but we have 32% of the landmass. Now let's go to the last section, too stupid. This is the assertion that the people in Scotland are too stupid, having poor education, so therefore would not have the wherewithal to manage themselves in a modern economy. Think about that for a second. So after 318 years of the Union, with the UK controlling us, they have not managed to educate Scots in what they state is an important part of the loving and caring relationship between England and other parts of the UK and Scotland. Aye, right. A very brief introduction to Scottish education history on one slide. Scotland has many ancient universities. You can see some of them here. Prior to 1911, all the university courses in Scotland from wherever were 4 years education, with the first year for everybody on philosophy, which is the art of understanding what's going on around you. But that was changed to the UK system in 1911. In the early 17th century, at the start of the Protestant churches, all children in Scotland were taught reading and writing. They were taught in Gaelic and Scots, the languages of Scotland. In 1872, London took over all Scottish education and forced everyone to learn English only, punishable to talk the other languages of Scotland. In fact, it nearly eradicated the Gaelic language completely. Cultural colonialism. In 1885, the position of Scottish Secretary for Scotland was created to run education. The post became a cabinet position in 1892. In 1911, the Scottish education moved from London to Edinburgh, and it became the responsibility of the Scottish Parliament from 1999. So here's some differences of over 2 slides. Since 2010, under the SNP, Scotland created a new curriculum, a different way to educate, called the Curriculum of Excellence. It set standards for all schools. Health and well-being, literacy and numeracy were the main things they were focusing on, and it was less rigid than the system in England. It had 3 different categories of pupils, 5 and below, and then from the ages of 5 to 15 were called the 1st to 4th levels, and then the senior phase 15 to 18. The exams in Scotland are called National 4s and 5s, Highers and Advanced Highers. England has a national curriculum which is a set of subjects and standards used in primary and secondary education, and they say English, Maths, Science and Humanities. They have 3 groupings as well for education, primary as shown here, secondary and post-16 education, and their exams are called SATs, GCSEs and A-levels. It is not possible to definitively say that Scottish education is better than England and vice versa, as both have strengths and weaknesses depending on the criteria you use. The English system is more structured, with the Scottish education being broader, covers more subjects. The Scottish curriculum, as I said, is designed to be more flexible and broader, allowing for greater student choice and delaying specialisation until later years. Higher education Scottish universities are highly regarded internationally, with several among the world's top ranking. In Europe, Scotland is considered the most highly educated country. Teacher support in Scotland is more structured, with professional development in place. Performance is good and trends are consistent, but there is one measure, the PISA International Assessment, that shows a downward trend. I'll talk about that in a second. That's important because it was used to attack us. England, its curriculum is more standardised, leading to early specialisation in subjects for the A-levels. Teachers have less development time compared to other countries according to the OECD. The performance in the 2022 PISA assessment showed that England scored above Scotland. The structure is more exam heavy, with greater emphasis on performance targets and standard tests than the broader situation in Scotland. So for broad flexible learning and world-class universities, Scotland may have an advantage. For structured standardised learning and performance in international tests in recent years, England may have an advantage. Ultimately, the better the system depends on your individual views or your organisation's views what you think is correct. Here is the PISA test. The PISA test is created by the OECD, and it takes some students from each country and publishes figures every year to show what's happening. And they do it in these 3 subjects. So you can see the figures for Scotland and England here. The figures in red on the left are the PISA averages for these subjects. Although variable, Scotland's PISA scores have been declining slowly since 2015. Is this due to the curriculum for excellence? At the moment the jury's out, but people are looking at it. This is one aspect and one measure, PISA. If you look at the exam results for secondary education, Highers and other exams in Scotland comparable to the English, you find that they're not declining, they're slowly improving, and they're quite normal. It's only the PISA test that was used to hammer us during the election processes in the past. So here's a summary of my presentation. 2We. Obviously a ridiculous assertion. Most countries in the world are smaller than Scotland and the UK, and they all thrive. 2Poor. Another crazy assertion. We are a colony. We were set up as a colony with no financial control in Scotland at all. All the levers of state, whether it's immigration, finance, everything, is controlled in London. we have the illusion of running some of it ourselves. GERS is crazy, firstly as it has so many estimates in it, and it was designed to show Scotland in a bad light from the 1990s. It also excludes all of the other revenue creation options which would be available to a sovereign state. It actually shows, when you look at it, how much Scotland is held back by the Union. Too stupid. Scotland is held up as having top-class university education and is internationally within Europe considered highly educated. Exam results for primary and secondary are steady with a slight upward trend. There is only one issue with one measure, that is the PISA test, where Scotland is slowly declining. As I said, people are looking into that to find out why. Thank you for listening to this video, but before you go, I have lots of videos made and there's a list of those here, all on YouTube. If you go into YouTube and find the search bar at the top with the magnifying glass and you type in @RobertAnderson9116, you'll get them all. Or you can type in the name of the video to individual videos as it's written here and you will get that specific video. This is my plan for going forward. I'm going to do the decolonisation of Scotland next, and we'll see how things go into next year. I would appreciate if you find some of these videos interesting and sometimes controversial and making you think, that you would subscribe to my channel @RobertAnderson9116. Thank you very much for listening.